Hey everybody! Welcome back. It's Dave here again. This is show number 5, and just a quick recap of where we're at. In show number 4, we talked about what I learned from Tony Robbins, and the topic was innovation. And in the first video about innovation, which was in our 4th show, Tony Robbins said that the quality of our question leads to the quality of the answer that we get. And so we want to make sure that if we're going to innovate, if we're going to stay on the front end, or we're going to try to be on the front end of the trend, we have to ask the right questions. Okay? So the key is to have the proper questions. Now, in the 80s, for example, there was a company called Sony who made the Walkman. How many people had a Sony Walkman? Well, what was the trend? Sony Walkman innovated because in the 70s, it was all about the size of the speakers, right? I mean, people had speakers that were like 6 feet tall, right? And what happens is when you have speakers that are 6 feet tall, you can't bring them anywhere, okay? And so they asked the question, how do we make music mobile for people? Now, we take it for granted now because we have our music right in our phone. But there was a time when that just wasn't possible, where the only way that you could listen to music while you were on the move was by listening to the radio. And then you'd have to have 3 or 4 minutes of, commercials in between the songs that you wanted to hear. And if it wasn't the song you wanted to hear, you only had 3 or 4 other choices. And chances are they were on commercial. So what did you do? Well, Sony asked the question, how do we innovate this? How do we stay on top of this? How do we give people a product that innovates? And so they came up with the Sony Walkman, which is funny when we look at it now because it's this huge thing, right? But at the time, that was the only way you could do it. And that was pretty hip, and it was pretty cool. And that innovation allowed them to stay, it had a shelf life of well over half a dozen years. In fact, marketing strategists, the scientists behind marketing, have determined that in the 80s, in that time period, that a product's shelf life of innovation was around 6 years. By the 90s, just from the little bit of technology that had started coming out, that was already down to 4.5 years. You know what it is today? Take a guess. Today, innovations have a shelf life of between 6 months and a year. That means if you haven't innovated your strategy, innovated your business in the last 6 months or a year, then you're already behind the trend. There's a lot of bad about that, right? Because it's like we have to feel like, oh my gosh, this is never over. Guess what, though? It's never over. If you're going to innovate, if you're going to be in this space, okay, you've got to stay ahead of the curve. If you're going to stay ahead of the curve, knowledge is power. You have to know that whatever you're doing, if it's working today, it's probably not going to work in 6 months or a year. So how do we get ahead of that curve? Because if you can get ahead of the curve, and if you can do that on a regular basis, then you can build a brand like a Coca-Cola, like a Hertz that we talked about, like a Harvard University, things that we've talked about in the last show, that because they were on the front end of that curve, okay, they developed a brand and a brand loyalty. That's what we want to do with our business too. But the question is, how do we do that? And this is really, the question and the answer are very, very much tied together, because we've got to keep asking these kinds of questions. If you're not asking the question, how can I innovate? How can I improve? How can I change? What are we selling? If you're not constantly asking those questions, then you're going to be behind the curve. You've got to understand that in this day and age, people have so many other choices. There's so many other things that they can do. If you look in the business opportunity space, for example, there is an endless supply of new things coming out all the time. And a lot of them are coming out from the same people. Those are people that understand that in order to innovate, you have to constantly be asking the question, how do I stay in front of the curve? What can I do now that is going to get me to the front of the curve, the front of the trend, okay? Now, in my business, I have found that the best way and the easiest way to do that is not to try to be the innovator all the time, but to try to surround yourself with innovators. It's true that whatever you immerse yourself in, be it a thought process, be it a locality, when you're immersed in something, that is going to be a constant influence on your thoughts. And we know that what you're focusing on is what you're going to get in terms of an outcome, right? If you're focused on the negative, you're much more likely to get a negative outcome, and vice versa. If you're focused on the positive, you're much more likely to get a positive outcome, okay? So our goal here is to try to take the products that we're selling, be it an MLM, be it a business opportunity, be it, vitamins, oils, whatever it happens to be, okay? If you want to stay on top, if you want to be on top and you're not there, let me just tell you, the biggest mistake that I see people making is they get involved in a company and they decide that the best way to get ahead is to copy what the most successful people are doing and do that. Well, the truth is that's probably an okay way to start because it gets you started, right? But what's going to happen is the person at the top is probably, if they're any good, they're probably going to innovate and change. Better to maybe do that to get started, but more importantly, better to think about how you can do it better. Don't just come into something with the idea that I want to do this, in a small way and see how it happens. I'm going to copy what the top players are doing and just see how that works. Because I can tell you right now, it's not going to work. You've got to innovate. So the best way to do that is to surround yourself with innovators. Keep the people around you in a space where they are constantly asking the questions. How do we innovate? What are we really selling? How do we reach more people? How do we reach the right people? Are we reaching the right people? I saw this, and I can't remember where I saw this actually, but I saw this, and it really made sense to me. 30% of the time, we should be spending time around people that we can bring up, people that we can help out, people that maybe aren't as successful as us in whatever walk of life we define that as. We should spend a third of our time with people who are our peers, people that are doing the same things that we're doing or at the same level that we're doing. And we should spend a third of our time with people who are better than we are. Now, that's not always hard to do. That's not always easy to do because a lot of times we're in either a geographic area or a place where we're being pragmatic, right? And we're trying to do the thing that needs to be done today. We're not thinking about these things strategically. That's the kiss of death, okay? Why? Because if you're just doing things pragmatically, if you're just working to get the work done to get something on the other end, and you're not being strategic, then you're working hard and you're not working smart. It's much more important to work smart than it is to work hard. So go out and try to find people that are better than you. Try to find people that are able to mentor you. Now, I'm not saying you go out and you copy these people because that's not going to work. We've already covered that. That's not going to work. It will to some extent, but that's a limited way of doing it. Look at the people that are better and look at them from a strategic point of view, and I bet you're going to find that they have innovated, changed the paradigm, done things their own way, made their own rules. This is what you're going to find from the highest level of success. So it's very important that we take time to help other people. We take time to be around people that are roughly at our level, challenge ourselves, but it's also important for us to take time to be with people that are actually better than us so that we can learn from them, okay? So if we're going to innovate, we have to remember that the shelf life nowadays is very short. So we've got to make sure that every day we're constantly looking not only at the work that needs to be done today, but we're working strategically. This is strategic innovation. And one of the ways that you can do this is one of the ways that the big boys do it. For example, Google. Google has what they call Skunk Works project, and they encourage their people to work 25% on these Skunk Work projects. Now, what does that mean? That means that's a project that is just an idea that you're trying out. Just something that is, you're just going to see it's a good idea and you're going to flesh it out to see if it works, right? And that way you have majority of your time focused on the things that you have to do and that you know are the things that are going to lead to success. These are the things that you have been strategic about. You've asked the right questions, and now you're implementing the policies that come from those questions. But you have to take some time to have some skunk work projects. Why? Because out of those skunk work projects, you can find some real gems because they force you to think outside the box. A couple examples of this are, you ever heard of something called Twitter? Those of you who know me know I love Twitter. And I'm on Twitter a lot, but Twitter was a Skunk Works project. How about Google Earth? Ever heard of that? That was a Skunk Works project. That was a project that people just worked on just because they wanted to, just because they thought it was a good idea, but it wasn't something that was sanctioned. It wasn't something that was in their strategy that they were implementing right now. And it forces you to get outside the box, to try new things, and to come up with new and innovative ways, there's that word, innovation, to solve problems. The best way to know what skunk work projects to work on are to ask questions. So I hope the last couple of episodes of the show, we've really pounded one thing into you, which is questions, questions, questions. Keep asking questions. Keep trying to redefine where you're at. Keep trying to innovate. Surround yourself with people that innovate. Encourage the people that are around you to be innovators, okay? Ask questions. Constantly ask questions. Get strategic about the questions that you ask. And remember, the quality of that question you ask is going to be a direct proportion to the quality of the answer that you get. And if you're asking the right questions, you can win at the game of innovation by constantly pushing, pushing, pushing. We only have a 6-month to 1 year shelf life. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. It can put us under a lot of stress, but you're never going to be able to rest on your laurels. If you're in an MLM, if you're in a direct marketing business, an affiliate marketing business, if you're selling vitamins or ebooks or whatever you're doing, okay, just remember, you're only as good as your last 6 months or a year. And if you haven't innovated what you're doing in that amount of time, then you're already behind the curve. Constantly ask those questions and innovate. And that's what I learned from Tony Robbins and among other things. But, I hope that this has been something that you can take and apply into your business. As always, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Join me on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. And let's keep this dialogue going. I really appreciate the comments, even the criticisms. I appreciate the feedback that I get from all of you. And this has been great fun for me to do. I'm going to continue to do it. So if you have a question that you want answered, make sure you look me up. And if you have a topic that you want to cover, we'd be glad to do that as well. In fact, I've had a request from one of my Twitter folks that is a public speaker and has some great ideas about marketing, and I might bring on a person and have him as a guest. Who knows? So the sky's the limit. It's open here. But just remember, let's ask those questions, let's innovate, and let's win. This is Dave. Thanks a lot for joining me.